Hello, it's just gone 9 o'clock Central African time. Welcome to your favorite weekly media news analysis program, Media Monitor, right here on the SABC News Channel on Channel 404, independent and impartial. I'm Peter Ndoro. Thanks for joining us this morning. Let's take a look at what you can look forward to on the program. Now we take a look at what forensic consultant Paul O'Sullivan claims that the Sunday Times newspaper's fake news threads on the SARS rogue unit, the Zimbabwe renditions and the Cato Manor death squad mean for investigative journalism and the media in general. And some of South Africa's big brands, including major banks, insurance companies and other car manufacturers, well, they've been caught advertising on fake news websites. All right, but before we get into a discussion on those and other issues, let's first take a look at what you're waking up to on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers. The front page of the Sunday Times has reported on the VBS Mutual Bank heist. According to the publication, ski jaunts to Alaska, fleets of flashy cars and homes in some of the most sought-after locations in the country are just some of the luxuries on which three of the men named in the damning reports of the looting of the VBS Mutual Bank splashed out on. The City Press is also leading with the looting that took place at the VBS Mutual Bank and how President Cyril Ramaphosa was aware of the widespread plundering at VBS early last year but failed to take action. The Sunday Independent is running a story on the EFF's Deputy Leader Floyd Shivambu's alleged involvement in the VBS Mutual Bank saga. According to the publication, despite Shivambu's denials that he benefited from VBS, could be in trouble with the Parliamentary Ethics Committee. The publication further states that Shivambu could also be facing a probe by law enforcement agencies. The Sunday Tribune, a similar theme. They're also leading with how EFF's Floyd Shivambu could be in trouble with the Ethics Committee in Parliament despite his denials that he generously benefited from the VBS Mutual Bank. The Weekend Argus has also picked up on the same story. EFF's Floyd Shivambu facing the music for alleged involvement in the VBS scandal and how he handsomely benefited from the bank. Right, crossing our border into Swaziland, the Sunday Observer there is leading with a story about how an eagerly awaited parliamentary sitting was postponed indefinitely. According to the publication, the election of 10 senators was supposed to take place on the 15th of October. It further states that the postponement was necessitated by challenges regarding the preparation of ballot papers, vetting process and overall logistics of Senate elections. Nigeria's Sunday Trust is carrying a story on how the federal government has banned 50 persons from traveling abroad over a corruption investigation and that the financial transactions of the persons of interest are being monitored by relevant agencies. All right, so that's what's on the front pages of your Sunday papers, and we'll be taking a look again at some of those stories and some of the stories inside as well. So fasten your seatbelts and get ready for this. We're coming up right after this.
Ekurhuleni Artisans and Skills Training Center is a practical artisans and skills development center who equips students with the necessary knowledge and practical experience to enter the labor force as semi-skilled workers. There is a strong focus and need for skills training in specific areas like boiler making, rigging, pipe fitting, welding, CNC programming, plumbing, electrical, air conditioning and refrigeration, bricklaying, carpentry and painting at the center. Ensure your future today with the Ekurhuleni Artisans and Skills Training Center.
Every day and during every hour of our time beyond sleep, the demons embedded in our society that stalk us at every minute seem always to beckon each one of us towards a realizable dream and nightmare. With every passing second, they advise with rhythmic and hypnotic regularity, get rich, get rich, get rich.
if the king will be involved in looting community money from a society bank, it's so shameful.
These people must sell their properties to give back the money. They are done auditing, so they must give back the money. Whoever took it must pay back. It is painful to wash clothes here.
Right, welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor, and we've got a packed show for you today. We're busy taking a look at all sorts of issues, and we're going to start with this, which is an expose of how big companies are indirectly funding fake news websites. Surfaced this past week. The report highlighted how these brands were caught advertising on websites that carry fake news. Household names like Samsung, Mercedes-Benz, ShopRite and Outsurance, to mention just a few, were all caught in the middle of this scandal. Well, to take us through this and help us unpack the story, I'm now joined by News 24 investigative journalist Jean Leroux, who's in our Cape Town studio. Jean, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. How does this happen that a well-known brand can find itself on a fake news website?
Peter, thanks for having me on the show. The entire expose that we did was actually the culmination of a 3-month investigation we did onto fake news. One of the interesting things that we picked up during this investigation was not only how they created and distributed these fake news websites, but also that a lot of the big name brands were advertising on these very sites. We started digging into why this would happen, because you see the likes of ABSA, Nedbank, Outsurance, even a few of Media24's sister companies were advertising on these websites. And once we started digging, we realized that it was not as much as a result of the ads placing their ads on the website, but due to a phenomenon known as programmatic advertising, which gets these ads displayed on the website.
All right, so there's these algorithms that calculate this website has so many hits and place this ad based on the person who's browsing's preferences. And so if I've once upon a time searched a loan, I'd find an ABSA Bank ad on this fake news website.
That's correct. The way that it works, I'm trying to boil it down into a nutshell, is companies can bid on certain keywords.
Right.
The moment that your browser is associated with those keywords, Google will place an ad on that specific website where a space has been provided for such an advert. That's also why you would sometimes see, like you've mentioned, adverts for car loans, or at least for car insurance, the moment after you've purchased a new vehicle. The browser would have kept track of your activity while you were searching for the vehicle, while you were applying for finance, while you were purchasing the vehicle. And once it's done, it'll flag you as a user that's susceptible to, for example, car insurance adverts.
So the fake news sites, they do this on purpose just to make money.
That's correct. During the course of the investigation, we identified quite a number of websites. By and large, they were trying to monetize the content on their website. I think there were 2 examples that we could find where there was no monetization going on, but both of these were aimed at sparing political opponents, and the value in those websites were limited to the political objectives they were trying to achieve. As for the rest, all of them are focused on making money off of the websites, either through the programmatic advertising, direct advertising. There was even one instance where the website was mining cryptocurrency in the background while a user was visiting the website.
So in terms of culpability or negligence, where along the line? Is it the ad agency? Is it the advertising, the company that's being advertised? Is it Google? Who is to blame? So, in the event that a well-known brand ends up on a fake news website?
Peter, you would have seen from a lot of the responses we received from these brands that they were a mix between shock and surprise at finding their adverts placed on these websites. I mean, a lot of that boils down to that disconnect between the publisher, which is now the website in this case, and the advertiser, and then the platform acting as a middleman. In this case, Google acts as a broker between the advertiser who has a product that he needs to engage with an audience and the publisher who needs to monetize their content. But the unfortunate side effect of that is that it divests the advertisers from control of exactly where their adverts end up being advertised on. I mean, in terms of the culpability for this, even though the brands stated that they were unaware, they condemned fake news and they don't support it, at the end of the day, it remains their responsibility. It's their brands being used to advertise these websites. They're indirectly monetizing these websites, and they're also providing these guys with an incentive to carry on with the distribution of fake news.
So the challenge that they have is that they want to advertise and they can't do it site by site. They have to use algorithms and these programs that you talk about. But with the proliferation of fake websites, it is now becoming quite difficult to decide what to do.
Yeah, that's something that the industry, the advertising platforms will need to sit around and engage with. We are faced with the scourge of fake news at the moment, and it's very easy for anyone to set up a website, get some Google ads going, and then within a couple of days have a website running and distributing fake news. The way that advertisers and the advertising agencies and the platforms deal with that is something that will need to be discussed. It's something that they will definitely need to look into going forward, because it's a scourge we face and it's something that we will need to combat going forward.
All right, so now I'm a innocent reader. I go online and I come across a website. How can I tell whether this is fake news or this is proper news? Is there a way? Are there telltale signs?
Unfortunately, a lot of these websites try and dress themselves to be as legitimate as possible. The easiest way that you can identify whether a website is a fake news website or not is to check whether you can identify the author of a particular article. These sites generally tend to use staff writers or pseudonyms to create their articles. And when trying to make contact with the publisher of the website, you'll also find that there's generally only an email address being provided with no physical address where you can actually go and knock on a door and speak to somebody at that particular office. So there's also measures being implemented by Media Monitoring Africa, for example, where they've implemented a no news applet that you can install on your browser. This would actually then go ahead and flag a website while you're visiting it as being a compromised site or being a site that you can trust.
All right, so I suppose that in the future, much like on Twitter, you have that tick that says this is authentic. This might be a way that some of these news organizations will get some kind of certification so that people feel safe straight away.
Yes, that's actually a second project that Media Monitoring Africa is engaged with at the moment. It's almost a third-party accreditation or a validation system that they're implementing. This project of theirs aims to get journalists and publishers to provide their details to them. They get checked. If you read an article online by Jean Leroux, for example, you can go to the website and see other articles that he's written. You can see the publications that journalist has worked for, and it just gives a reader some form of safety that he knows that he's dealing with a valid journalist.
So you did quite an extensive investigation into fake news. What sort of things did you uncover? I mean, just how many websites, fake websites, are out there? Is this something that is growing at a phenomenal rate? How much danger are we in as consumers?
What we picked up quite a lot during the investigation is that while we were initially only focusing on a single website, the website was called newsupdatessa.site. This website was primarily focusing on emotive issues, land reform, inept black government officials, claims made by farm victims, all these issues were racialized and inflamed using very sensationalist headlines. During the investigation, we started picking up that the owner of this website had in fact previously been involved with a similar fake news website back in 2016. I'm not sure if you'll recall the ANC ballots that were found in Ekurhuleni during the municipal elections. But back then, there were claims that this individual would be prosecuted, there would be criminal action taken against the person. Nothing, unfortunately, came of that, and he was left free to, go ahead and create his latest version of these fake news website. But what we've seen across many of these sites is that a lot of them don't operate only a single website, and for a lot of them, it's not only their first website either. Ironically, we used their Google adverts to trace them back to other websites using the same Google ads. So that allowed us to draw up a network of websites belonging to a particular individual. In terms of going forward and the proliferation of the fake news, with it being so easy to set up a website, create some content, publish it online, and have your website up and running in a few days, it's upon all of us to make sure that the content we consume is something we can trust and distribute.
All right, so Jean, thanks very much indeed for taking a look at this and sharing your thoughts with us and your findings with us. But it does mean that as consumers, as readers, we have to be more diligent and advertisers more responsible. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Peter.
Great. That was Jean Leroux, who's a News 24 investigative journalist, highlighting some of the things that are going online, fake news, sucking in the world of advertising. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more on Media Monitor. Stay with us.
Register to participate in the inaugural Intra-African Trade Fair IATF, taking place from 11 to 17 December 2018 in Cairo, Egypt. Over 70,000 visitors, buyers and sellers, 1,000 exhibitors. All African Union member states are expected, and $25 billion offered to finance trade deals concluded at the fair. Visit www.intraafricantradefair.com. IATF, transforming Africa.
Last week, residents from these areas embarked on a shutdown which turned into violent clashes with police in some areas. Protests were expected to resume today, but the Gauteng Shutdown Coordinating Committee says there's been a change of plans. What are those changes?
What has been going wrong is we've had all of these shutdowns in our communities. So that means that these communities are disabled. There's no activity happening there, and then we are breaking down our own communities. What we must do is we must take the fight to the powers that be.
We're coming to the powerhouses, and the JSE is the platform of all the powerhouses. We are coming here. This is notice today.
We will consider this, and then we will be in touch with you.
If they don't respond to us within 7 days, we will begin to cut what we call the economic blood flow of these organizations.
Welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor. Now, in what can only be described as a bizarre turn of events, forensic consultant Paul O'Sullivan has called out the Sunday Times newspaper to retract stories he calls fake news or face a boycott. He claims that fake news stories with threads, SARS rogue unit, Zimbabwe renditions and Cato Manor death squads are a plot to capture the criminal justice systems. He also says that he's not buying the Sunday Times editor Bongani Sikoko's editorial, which attempts to regain credibility and trust of its readership. Sullivan has now suspended his action and expects the publications to not carry any provocative stories or dishonest opinions should the publications fail to comply with demands. He'll reinstate his campaign immediately. Does this point to wider industry problems of a lack of trust and credibility in the news media? And how should journalists get to the truth in an age of fake news? Well, that's a discussion question that I'm glad to say I'm joined now by Caxton Professor of Journalism at WITS, Professor Anton Harber. Thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. And we also have political analyst Levi Ndo. Thanks very much for joining us and welcome.
Good morning.
All right, so this Paula Sullivan story has moved on quite a bit because the Sunday Times itself has got quite a story. We've got Johan Boysen, who is written about with the death squads in Cato Manor, and the editor again apologizing. Let's start with you, Prof. You wrote an interesting piece, I think, in Daily Maverick, looking at this. Take us through your thoughts about this episode and what it means.
Well, there's been major developments this morning, as you've seen, in the Sunday Times, of the three stories that have raised questions about the role of the Sunday Times in state capture, in facilitating and running stories that facilitated the capture of critical state institutions like SARS, the Hawks, and the police. This morning, the second of those stories, the Sunday Times has apologized for it and ran a full page with the apparent other side of the story. And they said the awards they got for the story they're going to return. So it's quite an extraordinary thing. I wrote a piece saying that controversy continues over these three stories. The first one being the SARS Rogue Unit story, and this one being the Cato Manor story, and then there's the story of the Hawks and the renditions that led to the change of guard at the Hawks. It continues to be controversial, even though the Sunday Times' new editor very graciously withdrew and apologized for the first of those stories, the SARS Rogue Unit stories. But I said the matter is not being put to rest. And it raises questions for the industry as a whole. The matter is not being put to rest because have people been held fully accountable? Has the Sunday Times fully explained whether or not they were just caught up in state capture, or whether there were people in the Sunday Times who, as it is alleged by some, were part of the state capture project? Number of questions remain as to how this could happen in a reputable, in the country's biggest newspaper. And I said we need an industry-wide inquiry to highlight the role of the media in state capture, to bring it all out in the open, to hold people fully accountable. And I said we need to look at the Sunday Times, we need to look at the SABC and the apparent capture of it under the previous board and management, and fully understand what needs to be done to stop that happening again. And we need to look at the issues around MultiChoice, who is accused of paying exorbitant amounts improperly and corruptly, both to the Gupta channel ANN7 and to the SABC in order to get them on side in its lobbying process.
All right, so that's a great opener. Levi, I want us to be careful about this fake news word, and I just wonder, when does a journalist's mistake becomes fake news? Is it when he knowingly participates in a state capture project or unwittingly does so? Is it still fake news? How do you make that differentiation? Because I would imagine some of the journalists perhaps should have known better but didn't, but were not starting out with malicious intent.
Well, I think we need to start from looking at the industry itself. There is a lot of competition at play here. And what then would happen is that some of the media houses or newspapers would always love to be the first to come with a story. And in most instances, they wouldn't go into the details of what is actually happening, but they always want to get the praises that were the first people
to come up with a story. But another area that we also need to look at as well is that you have journalists that are on the ground and that are under pressure. Even though they know that the story, they still have to get other facts so that they come with what is actually credible, with all the necessary truth that is needed. Unfortunately, they are under pressure to go and submit the news that is actually incomplete. But at the heart of all this is what guides the profession. You have got code of ethics in journalism. Journalists cannot just do as they like. And that is why now you get in a situation that in some instances, journalists will then have to rely on certain individuals because they want a story to portray a particular outcome. And that is an area there where, for me, journalists are actually found wanting.
Could I add to that? Because I just want to add to clarify, because the phrase fake news is abused enormously, mostly by Donald Trump, who just uses it to denounce news he doesn't like. That if he's not comfortable with it, he says it's fake, which usually means it's true. Fake news is not when journalists make mistakes or journalists are biased or journalists rush something into print before it's finished. Those are journalistic errors, mistakes, lack of professionalism, and these are important issues. Fake news is the deliberate attempt to use false news to affect an election, to achieve some kind of political outcome. In the case here, we're looking at whether it was used by some to further the goal of state capture.
You've run a newspaper and you've overseen journalists in the past. And I'm just wondering, when a journalist is doing his job, is it possible that they get sucked into a story and they just start having tunnel vision and start, because Boyson here is saying that, look, I presented evidence to these journalists and when they wrote this story, it was ignored. How does that happen?
It does happen, but in a large and reputable organization like the Sunday Times or the SABC, we expect there to be a process of questioning, of examination, of verification. It goes through a number of people to say, have you got the evidence? Is this fair and balanced? Are you giving the full story? Is the story complete? Unfortunately, under current conditions, staff cuts, resource cuts, the acute financial pressures in all newsrooms, a lot of those steps are being removed or skipped over, and that means stuff is getting through that shouldn't. The question is whether it was more than that at the Sunday Times, why there was a systematic problem, why a series of stories, not just one, but a series of stories systematically got through unchecked.
What's your take on the Sunday Times? Because my fear is that if it is that powerful people can infiltrate newsrooms and extract people from there to help them with their projects. And I read about Pearlie Hubert, who couldn't stand what was going on, that she actually left without a job to go to, even though she was a single mom. She could see that there was a problem. They started sidelining her. It seems as if when that sort of thing happens, there's some element of culpability. Somebody's doing something on purpose.
Well, it goes to the question that says, is there a possibility for newsrooms to be infiltrated or journalists to be
captured?
That actually goes right there. And I would say then it's indeed possible. But the other question would be, even though it's possible, then it actually entrenches on the code of ethics of the profession. But another area for me would be to say, do we have journalists who will then sit down and just decide to start a story from nothing? And if that is the case, it actually affects very seriously the credibility of the publication. And if all the hierarchical elements are being ignored, from the journalist to the sub-editor to the editor, and all these hierarchical elements are being ignored, then there is a big problem. And that, for me, says that the fundamentals of the profession are not being observed. And that becomes a very, very big problem to the media industry in South Africa.
All right. So Paul O'Sullivan is calling for a boycott. Is there a danger in saying, look, something went wrong? Will the media be under threat if we boycott every time a story gets done wrong?
Look, I think we have to build our media and we have to build our journalism and we have to deal with the problems and the issues. So I'm arguing that the answer is not a boycott, but the answer lies from within the media industry, the news media industry. We have to get together. We have to say there is a problem here. It's not just the Sunday Times. It was a very deep problem at SABC. It was a very deep problem at ANN7 and New Age. And MultiChoice has a real problem as well in how it dealt with certain issues. We need to fully account, openly, transparently, what happened, what should have happened, what do we need to do to make sure it never happens again. We need to be completely open and transparent. It's an industry-wide issue. But let me also say, I think it's very important to say this. We're being very critical of elements of the media. But there are other elements of media that emerge from this saga as heroes, who did incredibly well, who played a key role in countering and defeating state capture. In, for example, exposing what was going on at the SABC and exposing the management and what it was doing at SABC. And those are the heroes. You mentioned Pearlie Joubert, a particular hero for standing up to nonsense stories. And those are the people we must honor, we must remember, and say these are the people who saved our profession and deserve to be recognized for it.
Levi, we've run out of time, but I want to give you a quick word, 30 seconds at the most. Apart from the public broadcaster, who has no choice but to be fair always, is there a problem with publications being biased, other than the public broadcaster?
Yes, indeed, there is that element. You know that if I buy this publication, I'm aware that this publication is for or against this.
And that's okay, was it not?
Well, it means then that element of biasness does exist. But for me, what is very important, Prof, is that journalism as a profession has to go back to its fundamentals and ensure that reporting is supposed to be based on what is actually the foundation of the profession. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of situations where we're going to have this kind of situations, and the publications will always be saying, we're sorry.
And sorry sometimes is just not enough. Levi and Dirk, thanks very much indeed for joining us, and we say goodbye to you, but Prof Anton, you're going to stay with us for a bit longer. Thanks very much indeed for your contributions on this portion of Media Monitor. We take a quick break, but where does the case of a missing journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, leave Saudi Arabia? Stay tuned for more on this topic on Media Monitor when it returns.
We are in the fourth industrial revolution.
Things aren't the same anymore.
Technology is taking over much of what we do. That includes how we make payments.
Blockchain is the future.
On Network, we have robots, hackathons, and tech entrepreneurs.
Making sure that your business is well known across all borders. We use social media.
That's Network with me, Pumela Zondi, on Saturdays at 20:30 and Sundays at 17:30.
All of us there in the NEC have our smallanyana skeletons, and we don't want to take out all skeletons out, because they will be, or hell will break loose.
Buildings,
submerged homes and devastated families.
Biggest earthquake in here.
Their homes and buildings moved like boats.
Big shake, and I ran as fast as I can.
These are the satellite images depicting the area before the disaster.
The ground is like a wave.
I've never seen anything like this in my life.
It is unbelievable. You can actually smell the stench of dead bodies around.
The National Hurricane Center said earlier on Tuesday that Michael was a Category 1 storm with sustained winds of up to 150 kilometers per hour. Residents were implored to get out of harm's way ahead of life-threatening waves, winds and rains. Flash flooding over the weekend caused 13 deaths in Central America after Michael formed off the coast of northern Honduras.
Now, welcome back. You're watching Media Monitor, and one of the stories that we're looking at this morning, which has caught global attention, is the disappearance of a Saudi Arabian journalist and critic of the regime of the regime in Saudi Arabia, Jamal Khashoggi. The mystery behind Khashoggi deepens as leaders weighed in on his disappearance. The U.S. intelligence reportedly knew about a Saudi plan to capture the missing journalist in Turkey. Khashoggi has been missing for more than a week now after going into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul for an appointment that had been scheduled to obtain wedding papers. Well, Turkish officials privately believe that he was killed at the consulate, an allegation denied by the Saudi Arabians, which say that he left the consulate soon after he arrived. Well, to give us a bit more insight on this story, we're now joined by Naeem Jinnah, who's Executive Director at Afro-Middle East Center. Naeem, thanks very much for joining us. Welcome to the program. Perhaps we can start by saying, why would this journalist, be targeted in the way that you would think that this man was a serious threat to humanity, flying in agents, as it's alleged in some of the reports, to deal with him. Tell us a little bit about him and why he was such a threat.
Frankly, Jamal Khashoggi wasn't even a threat to the Saudi regime, let alone the rest of humanity. I mean, Jamal was always supportive of the Saudi establishment, supportive of the Saudi monarchy. He thought that there should be some reforms, but he wasn't anti-Saudi, he wasn't anti-monarchy. But the recent situation, particularly with Mohammed bin Salman becoming crown prince and effectively the leader of Saudi Arabia, is that he brooks no dissent whatsoever. So even people who are not really dissidents like Jamal, but might be somewhat critical of some aspect of the government policy, would be a target. So Jamal's been very critical of the whole 2030 vision, wasting of money to build a whole new city, those kinds of things, of the corruption, etc., which in any normal society you'd kind of just ignore. But Saudi Arabia is not a normal society. I mean, the kind of things that Anton said earlier about the SABC would get him killed in that kind of context. So I think that's it. It's not just that you have to be a political dissident, but even mildly critical, which is what Jamal was, got him killed.
So this has now escalated to, the White House. We've got major media outlets pulling out sponsorship for conferences in Saudi Arabia. Why do you think this has escalated to such a level?
That's a very good question. If you consider that thousands of people have been killed by Saudi Arabia and Yemen, for example, in the past 2 years, including school children, and we've seen media stories about this, but nothing close to the kind of response that Jamal has received. Look, it's partly that a human interest story with the name of a person whose fiancé is waiting outside is more gripping for people, fortunately or unfortunately, than a nameless bus of school children, right? But it's also the politics around it, I think. This takes place in Turkey. The relationship between Turkey and Saudi Arabia has not been great in the recent past. and they'd be looking at opportunities to get at each other. In the United States, Jamal has residence in the United States. He has been writing a column for the Washington Post, which is a fairly respected paper, quite influential in Washington among Congress people, etc. And so even for those Americans in Washington, this became much more of a personal thing than Yemeni school children far away. And I think that those kinds of things come together. So when you find a kind of Republican right-wing senator like Lindsey Graham coming out as strongly as he did, even calling for arms sales to be stopped, then you wonder. But it's that kind of personal thing that brings it in, I think.
All right. So yes,
if I can just add to the description you're giving and the reasons you're giving, there's been a very important campaign run by UNESCO to end the immunity against the killing of journalists. There's been a lot of journalists killed at work in recent times. It's been an escalating problem, and UNESCO has been running a campaign to say the immunity that people apparently have for killing journalists must end. And I think that's very important. And this is a significant moment, not to say this death is any more important than the other deaths that have occurred as a result of Saudi action. But it's important too that there should be a sense that you pay, that you have to account for these actions. And of course, what is more horrific than as it appears to have happened within an embassy really is the most chilling stuff.
How do you tell a story like this? At what point? Because at the moment we actually don't really know anything except that he went in. There's a clip of him walking into a building. And now the stories are, depending on which outlet you read, we've got dismemberment, we've got torture, we've got, as an editor, how much do you say in a, I mean, it's still quite unknown.
Well, the difficulty here is verification. So clearly there are sources within Turkey who are saying that he was killed, not that he's just disappeared. They clearly know something because they're saying very clearly that he was killed. They're suggesting dismemberment. So they know something, and one can only hope that those close to the Turkish authorities are verifying these stories. And certainly the Saudis have been unable to produce any evidence of where he is, that he left, that he's still alive. So this is an easy story to tell because it tells itself.
Let me just make 2 points about that. One is that I think that the Turks, and particularly Turkish intelligence service, have been playing this very well from a media perspective. I suspect that much of the information that we're seeing coming out, they had quite early on in the past 12 days, but they're giving little bits every day. So they're ensuring that the media coverage is kept up. And so that's, from the perspective of editors being cautious, I think. The second thing around that is that, look, as a commentator and as someone who watches the region, I'm much more willing to be a bit adventurous with my opinions. I'm not sure that editors should be as adventurous as I can be, right? But from an editor's perspective, all the news that you're getting around this, so I believe the story that he was killed. I believe that there was dismemberment. I believe that they do have a video of it. I believe that the audio is there from his iCloud, etc. But as an editor, should you just believe that? The only media that claims to have authoritative information on this are state-linked media in Turkey. And so I think your caution is important, and that editors should be cautious, despite what I say my own belief is about what had happened.
And there's a political curve in this whole thing. I mean, Tayyip Erdogan has got gains here, and he's almost forcing Donald Trump to step up as well. So that
and Erdogan himself, by the way, has not accused the Saudis yet. Right. His intelligence services have done so through nameless spokespersons.
Right. Yeah. So, but does he get some credit for it then, by holding the Saudis to such a, pulling them to order, literally in this way?
I think that very much depends on how he plays it when he comes out. As you rightfully say, he's significantly leaving it to others to play, and it depends very much how he chooses to use it and how skillfully he does that.
All right.
And I think that he's going to use the anger in the US to latch on to and make it a kind of Turkish US anger when finally they do release all the information. And again, the geopolitics comes into it. But remember also yesterday, the Pastor Brunson, which was a big sticking point between the US and Turkey, was released, so that there'll be a little warming of relations. And I think that Saudi Arabia will get the brunt of it.
All right, okay. And the pastor prayed for Donald Trump to have wisdom. Let's hope that comes.
Let's hope that prayer is accepted.
All right, let's come back home and let's take a look at local newspapers, and most of them front pages going with VBS. And this story, I suspect, has got little ways to run. Let me start with you, Anton. And Naeem, I know you've got a couple of stories you want to look at as well. But VBS has caught your attention, Anton.
Well, it's caught the nation's attention because it's such an extraordinary story. And I don't think there's any doubt that it has huge political implications. It certainly has implications for a whole lot of institutions in the country as to why it was allowed to happen, why it wasn't caught earlier. Where were the auditors? Where was the Reserve Bank? And City Press this morning quotes a shareholder in the bank saying they'd alerted the Reserve Bank and President Cyril Ramaphosa some time back, and they knew. So they're denying it, but there's some explaining to be done as to how we get to this extraordinary position.
South Africa was very different a year ago. Might that be a reason that nothing happened then?
Yes, but I still think certainly the Reserve Bank. I think everyone who had power and authority and responsibility and who got an inkling that something was wrong at this bank needs to account for why they didn't intervene, because there are ordinary people who are deeply affected by this, and one cannot avoid saying that the party under particular scrutiny is the EFF. Not just because the name Shavambu came in the recipients of money, although it's now denied, but because we were all mystified as to why the EFF was defending VBS so adamantly and against all the evidence. So you have to wonder what lies beneath the EFF.
Well, we'll hear on Tuesday when they do their presser. We'll see what comes out of there. Naeem, what caught your attention in the papers?
Well, if I can just add to the VBS thing, I think that the political implications, as Anton says, are very important. I think one reason why the nation has been, I was going to say captured, but it's not the right term to use, has been so taken by the story is, look, the whole Gupta leaks, etc. We're talking about large amounts of money, way beyond the 2 billion that's involved here. But the one thing that I think that really strikes at the heart of our nation is that here it's identifiable, ordinary, poor people. So we're hearing stories now, some of which might be true, some of which might not, of a woman who was a teacher outside the province, then retired, all her savings in VBS, comes back, loses virtually everything and has to sell tomatoes now as a retiree, and various other such stories. And I think that this is really, if all the state capture things didn't affect us emotionally, this one has done so. Yeah.
And the authorities must step up. But we're running out of time, so there was another story that okay. All right, so final thoughts about what this week might hold. What should we be looking out for, do you think? Let's start with you, Anton.
Well, as I said, there's a lot of questions to answer on the VBS story. The EFF in particular, we want to know why they've delayed why it takes them over a week to respond.
Unusually so.
If no money came into your account and you're clean, you say that in 20 minutes. You don't wait a week. So we're watching eagerly to see what comes out there, and let's hope they come completely
might have
clean.
to respond to this.
A lot of people have explaining to do, and that's going to be critical this week. There should be arrests. There won't be for some time, but there really should be. We should be looking to see who's arrested.
The Khashoggi saga, do you think?
And KPMG, by the way, we shouldn't forget. And the report, of course, is detailed enough that there can be arrests soon. On the international level, I think that the Khashoggi, but broader Saudi story is going to dominate the week. And that means the relationship also with Turkey, the US, and the kind of whole, that triangle, I think is going to be a big story for
America.
the next week.
Will sell you arms, but will punish you in other ways.
Yes.
Okay.
You do it quite well.
That's where we're going to have to leave it, unfortunately. Naeem, Gina, Anton Harbour, thanks very much indeed for joining us on Media Monitor today.
Thank you.
And to you at home, thanks very much for tuning in. Make a date next week at the same time for more of the same from me and the team. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye-bye.
We pride ourselves on being